Everyone knows that politics isn't working. Everyone can feel that the country isn't where it should be. Tonight just could, be the turning point.
He achieved nearly 55% of the vote, almost doubling Labour's 2024 majority at a time when they're well behind reform in the polls. Andy Burnham's name on the ticket meant that the majority went up from 5,400 to 9,200 votes. Now, can he replicate that magic beyond Makerfield? The writing does look to be firmly on the wall for the present Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Andy Burnham didn't reference his quest for number 10 in his victory speech, but make no mistake, right now, a coup against Keir Starmer is underway. Andy Burnham's team now believe that they have the evidence from that by-election to back up their claim that the 56-year-old Liverpudlian former mayor of Manchester can slay reform and save the Labour Party. Keir Starmer disagrees, is digging in, but really, Anne, how big is his army? We're going to take you through what happens next and when.
It's been a tricky campaign for Reform UK and a rookie candidate. They lost despite getting the second best ever by-election result for Nigel Farage's party, increasing their share of the vote. Voters in Makerfield clearly decided it was a two-horse race, didn't they? So we saw the Greens, the Lib Dems, the parties on the left, and even some Tories swinging behind Burnham.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was up all night for Sky analysing the results, and I thought I saw what I call kind of smart voting in this by-election. Essentially, that's tactical voting by people who've worked out who they're determined not to win. And in this case, what you saw was the sort of progressive wing working out how to stop Reform UK. So if you look at the numbers in any depth, in 2024, the Tories, Lib Dems and Greens got 22% of the vote. In the by-election overnight, that added up to 3%. Right? Why does that matter? Because it shows that basically almost everybody picked one or other of the big parties, with a bit of an exception about Restore Britain, what we'll talk about in a little bit. But the bottom line of that was, like, for instance, the Tories lost their deposit in Makerfield, which is a sort of extraordinary outcome, given that in 2019 they had like a third of the vote in that constituency. But, that is nevertheless one of the things that's going on in our politics. So it's not quite the multi-party landscape that we have been talking about. But here's another interesting thing, because later in the podcast, we'll talk about the fact that there were actually 3 by-elections that happened overnight. The one in Makerfield, but also 2 in Scotland. And it wasn't a bad night overall for the Tories because they actually won one. The only by-election where the result flipped from one party to another was in Scotland in the Aberdeen South constituency, vacated by the SNP star Stephen Flynn, where the Tories leapfrogged from 3rd place to 1st place after a concerted campaign by Kemi Badenoch. So a shot in the arm for them. Again, just looking at this trend, there was a bit of smart voting there as well, because the SNP vote in Aberdeen South didn't collapse. This was a Tory victory at the expense of a Labour Party, where I think Labour voters wanted to vote for the union against the SNP, as well as a sort of campaign on oil and gas. So I think the underlying trends tell us that the next election is really very competitive, because voters look like they know what they're doing when they know who they don't want to be the winners in any given seat.
Funny, isn't it? You end up with a multi-party landscape in which the voters then boil it down in their own heads to a kind of often two-horse race, or just decide, as you say. I like the idea of smart voting. So the SNP held on to the third and final by-election of the night. That was Arbroath and Broughton Ferry, part of Greater Dundee, where the SNP holding on with just under 5,000 majority there. But maybe we should turn our attention back to Makerfield, Sam. It was certainly a very engaged electorate, 59% higher even than the last general election, and a swing from Reform to Labour of 3.4%. Now, that's exactly the kind of result. If you're on Team Burnham, you have a proof of concept there, don't you, that you can get into and nibble into that Reform lead in places like Makerfield. There were some around Andy Burnham saying that would translate into a 130-seat majority for Labour. I don't know if you're like me, you're going to attach a health warning to that one. Not sure I'd go immediately run to the bookies with that one, but whichever way you cut it, it is a triumph, isn't it, for Team Burnham, Louise Haigh, Annalise Midgley. Now a question of how they strategise next, and here is a bit of what Louise Haigh said earlier.
As I say, it's very much in the hands of the Prime Minister of how he wants to play that. There'll be no aggressive challenge. It's in everyone's interest that this is managed and orderly, and Andy won't be doing anything rash or hasty in the aftermath of tonight.
After leaving the count, he announced he was going for a pint, but we're expecting him to pop up in public this morning to thank activists and indeed voters in front of the cameras. We know he won't be launching a challenge at this stage and won't be down in London before Monday when he is sworn in. But this is all a choreography, isn't it? I mean, right down to the pint and the time that you come down to London. It was like Lennon to the Finland station. What do you make of this choreography?
Well, listen, I think that there is a very clear, very thought-through strategy that was going to play out in the next few days on behalf of Team Burnham. I'm not saying it'll work, but they have got a sense of what they want to do. The goal of the Burnham campaign right now, and you heard a bit of this from Louise Haigh just now in that clip, is to try and engineer a bloodless, conflictless coup. Right? They want Keir Starmer to go without a fight, but the quiet bit that they're not saying out loud is that they realise that as of now, they're not quite there. So what they're trying to do is engineer a situation where Keir Starmer has to make all the difficult decisions himself, and essentially they want to engineer a situation where he realises it's checkmate. And what that means in effect is they want him to start being the aggressor rather than Andy Burnham. Let me explain what I mean by that. And this is where the cabinet comes into play. As it stands, Keir Starmer will face his cabinet on Tuesday morning. But we already know Keir Starmer has told members of his government he doesn't want people in his government who don't back him as PM. Yeah. So people in the cabinet are now expecting to get a call from the Prime Minister's team at some point between now and Tuesday, asking whether or not they're loyal to Burnham or whether or not they're loyal to Starmer. And I think people that are loyal to Burnham will, in private, not in public, but in private, make clear that that is their position. I mean, frankly, people like Ed Miliband have already said so, that they want Keir Starmer to stand down. So your Ed Milibands, your Shabana Mahmoods and your Lisa Nandis, they won't resign or sort of come out and make a pop this weekend or say anything critical publicly, but they will tell Number 10, if asked privately, they want a replacement Prime Minister and a timetable from Keir Starmer. Then it's down to Keir Starmer to decide, does he sack them on the basis of that disloyalty or not? And so here's the thing, Anne. Can Ed Miliband really be sacked by Keir Starmer? Does he have the strength to do that? Can Keir Starmer oust Lisa Nandy, Shabana Mahmood? Can he have 3 or more gaps in his cabinet and then credibly say he wants to launch a leadership contest where 100 plus MPs are already saying he can't take the party into the next election? You know, Keir Starmer saying I'm in it for the long haul. Yeah, that just feels to me like a very difficult backdrop. But that's sort of where he's being. There's a sort of pincer movement to try and get him into that position. And maybe Keir Starmer just doesn't make the calls, doesn't ask the question, tries to hang on that way. At that point, I think sort of frustration bubbles over. But I think this idea that there's a bit of a loyalty test needed for the government to function, the cabinet to function, is the thing that causes action next week. So we might get a sort of quieter weekend, a promise of a conversation between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer next week. But the wider Burnham camp making clear that if Keir Starmer wants to leave the job with dignity and, some sense of a legacy intact, then he has the ability to do that. Because if they don't, they've got the YouGov Labour members poll showing that Keir Starmer loses to Andy Burnham 59% to 37%. So that I think is the plan. The big call by Keir Starmer's opponents is that Keir Starmer isn't as stubborn as he's sounding this morning. What do you make of that? What do you make of the landscape? You've been having conversations. What do you think?
Well, it was about 6 a.m. when we got the first response, wasn't it, from Keir Starmer. He posted on X. A sort of welcome to Andy Burnham talking about defeating hate. Okay, that I think we meant hate reform, not inside the Labour Party, but just to be clear on that one. But again, it was all couched in terms of this was a Labour campaign, wasn't it? Well, really, it was a Burnham campaign, and everybody knows that. We will probably hear more from the Prime Minister this morning. He was out and about last night, actually, in London with his wife, with Vic Starmer, and still looking very calm, very sort of Keir when very together, not giving any sign at all there's anything else going on here. And that seems to me, Sam, to be always the way that when he's under challenge, he has this kind of carapace, it's almost a bureaucratic way of just saying, well, I'm Prime Minister. I mean, I'm Prime Minister until something, if you want the weapons, come and get me. I'm not going to make any concession. I was just very struck by that he makes no concession to the situation. So as you put it, will that continue to be the case? Or now, as these calls come in and conversations are had and people speak with him privately over the weekend, will he acknowledge that really is a front of house story and it has to shift at some point? It'd be interesting when he does the likely pool interview this morning or something similar. What will his tone be? Is he going to go to that message that he did a bit earlier in the week, which is that I'm at G7, I'm going to fight on? Or does he really just treat this by-election as if it were a by-election? Because at this point, it's in plain sight that Andy Burnham is going to be heading to London. And it's how do you think he, as well as Burnham, then get through this awkward interaction until the facts are out there?
Yeah, I think there's another factor in play, which is quite how the mass ranks of the 401 if you exclude Keir Starmer, Labour MPs now react. I think there's a hope amongst some around Burnham that they'll start to make a move. It's there are 90, if I check my notes, 94 of them have come out against Keir Starmer, say he can't fight the next election, want him to stand down. Culture of the party, which is a lot. But are there another 50 or 100 who either do it publicly or sort of do it quietly through the parliamentary committee? You can send a message to Number 10 without going public. But what was quite instructive, there was one anti-Starmer Labour MP who messaged me over the last couple of days, who said, and I think this is the tone I think that a lot of people want now, I suspect that there might genuinely be a pause over the weekend to give the PM time to consider his position. Nobody wants this to be unnecessarily messy. And I think that captures the mood quite well, which is for those that love 24-hour news, like me, necessarily, and kinetic action, actually you might be just drawing a breath over the weekend.
And also thinking about this is really a regicide, and Labour is very uncomfortable with that historically. Tories made a bit of a habit of it, but it often does leave a lot of trauma in a party. And I think it's dawning on some people I spoke to close to Andy Burnham. There was a bit of a rush and a push and the land is ours sort of feeling a few weeks ago. And then I think you suddenly think on what terms you get in, and does it just look like you dragged out a Prime Minister elected, with big majority? Can you in some way nuance that? I mean, by the way, I think this is a hopeful scenario, that it doesn't look that there's a legacy of terrific bitterness, and you have Keir Starmer and those. I saw a number of people around him last night who would still say they were loyal to him, want him to continue as Prime Minister. I would say if you look at their faces, I think it's glum. There's nobody saying, what a load of old nonsense this is. The media got this all up and he'll come back and he'll come into cabinet. Nobody is saying that.
And we're seeing a lot of Vic Starmer. I think there's a point at which the family come into this as well, because it's a question of dignity, and that's a personal as well as a political question.
One thing I'll say about Vic Starmer, G7 out last night looking after, say, fabulous. And she really, I think the plan for this year was we were going to see more of Lady Starmer. Of course, the way things have worked out, there's not been, it's not been that kind of thing. Well, we're focusing on the Prime Minister's wife. Slight sense of body armour, I think. When she's alongside, people then also have to engage with both of them. But she's obviously there. She's in the trenches with him. Now, you say could be the family saying, we can get on with the rest of our lives. Let's go and have a nice summer and spend more time with the kids, which I think he genuinely would appreciate. But right now, I have to say, if he's fighting, she is there. She is in that Praetorian Guard with him in a nice designer frock. Respect. She's really, making clear. She's not like, I'm just going to sit at home and wait to see what happens. It's interesting. Just a playbook this morning. We were just talking about what happens to those in cabinet and what happens to people who, it would make a big difference, wouldn't it? Whatever Ed Miliband does will make a big difference, Shabana Mahmood, etc. So my colleague Sam Francis on Playbook picking up the same kind of chatter that we were talking about. Yes, there is a resignation watch, but there's also now talk of a kind of 72-hour grace period. So spokespersons for both Miliband and Mahmood saying no plans to quit. Well, I think that's very carefully phrased. I mean, do you have plans for what you're going to do in 72 hours' time?
I'm going to be sleeping. Yeah, it sounds like we're all aligned. It's this business of wanting Keir Starmer effectively to be the aggressor. The Burnham team don't want to be seen, and his allies to be seen making the first move. Right, we're going to make a sort of principled hop into the future and just turn to the question of what Andy Burnham could be if he is to be our next Prime Minister, which now looks very likely. And for weeks, he's been saying, in essence, that his manifesto for the country is what he's done in Manchester. He's been the Manchester Metro Mayor for 9 years. That means he's sort of the kingpin of the 10 councils that cover that area, which stretches from Wigan through Manchester City and Gorton and Denton. All of those areas are were his domain, and he's saying that's my calling card. Look at that. Look at how well it's done. And that's why I should be in number 10. Right. Now, forgive me, Anne. I'm just going to do a little bit of a plug, which I hope to entice members of our podcast community to watch a film that I've been doing over the last month or so with producer Joe Cook. Because we've been spending quite a bit of time in Greater Manchester to work out whether Greater Manchester metro area is as good as Andy Burnham says, whether he gets the credit, and generally finding out what people, on the street and some of those closest to him really think. I've been talking to Richard Lees, who was council leader for 25 years. I've been talking to Jim O'Neill, who actually, it turns out, is an economic advisor. They've just confirmed that overnight, an economic advisor to Andy Burnham. I've got a little bit of him in the film as well. I'm just going to play you because we talked to Jim O'Neill a couple of weeks ago for the film that's coming out at 5:00 today on Sky and on YouTube. And at that point, Jim O'Neill had a bit of a warning for Andy Burnham.
What he really needs to develop is the right people around him to develop the detail and the path to more successful ambition and fiscal credibility to get there.
I hear you say that, and I also hear Boris Johnson,
Yeah.
Somebody who built a team,
Yeah.
but that didn't end so well.
Boris didn't build the right team around him, and he was more interested in the image of the game than the actual game.
So is that the warning for Andy Burnham?
It is very definitely the warning for Andy.
So yeah, if he is advising Andy Burnham, that warning about not to be too much like Boris Johnson, I think will be ringing in his ears. 5:00 today on YouTube, on Sky News. Do watch. It's 18 minutes, so fans of things under 20 minutes will hopefully enjoy it. So please do watch that. It'll be in my social media feed all over the channel and all over YouTube.
So interesting to hear from Jim O'Neill there, former Goldman's chief economist, very loyal to Labour. He came in with Gordon Brown to help out there when Gordon Brown was in government. So he has a long history and a lot of respect in the financial community. That sounds to me a bit like also Andy Burnham wanting to get rid of that reputation as the guy who said the unfortunate thing about, why do we have to be in hog to the bond markets? Well, because that's what determines your borrowing, and you can be critical of the structure of the bond markets, but the idea that you could just come in and in some way tear it up was for the birds. So I think we're seeing a lot of appointments that sort of move Andy Burnham away from that. Why don't we just, which Labour can be a bit prone to about things like the bond markets? Or can't we just imagine another international finance system entirely? Well, they're in for the one they've got. So they've also got Richard Hughes from the OBR advising. He came a cropper over that OBR leak. But yeah, I don't think there's any other reason why one wouldn't want Richard Hughes as an OBR specialist around. Playbook also reporting that Grace Pritchard, who was in the room actually for the Burnham election victory, she's been on Ed Miliband's team very prominently. She is set to become Andy Burnham's head of comms. I have to say I didn't see that one coming, but I wonder what that signals in terms of closeness between the Ed Miliband team and the Burnham kind of future compact that you were asking us to look into. But it will be quite interesting. Yeah, apparently she was running comms for the by-election campaign on secondment from the Energy Secretary, and Burnham took to her so much that he sort of said, would you like to stick around in the unlikely event that this leads to me having a path to number 10?
I was hearing about other SPADs, other special advisors who were working for the Burnham campaign sort of in secret without resigning their job, cut and pasting some Labour Party stuff into Google Docs. So the Burnham campaign struck me as being very, very well informed. We've hit 20 minutes. There's one more thing I want to say, which is just I think the battle for the right has got a bit tougher with Reform UK, which went into this by-election saying we think we can win, come out saying we were always the underdog. They now have this challenge from Restore Britain, the Rupert Lowe party. But I just want to say one thing about that result. For days we heard from Restore Britain suggesting there was going to be some kind of surge, some kind of big result. Social media, I think, took us in lots of misleading directions. On YouGov's poll at the moment nationally, Restore Britain are on 5%. They got 6.8%. This was no particular triumph. They had a massive campaign in Makerfield and it didn't cut through. They didn't see a big vote surge. But nevertheless, I think there will be questions for Reform which haven't looked necessarily that sure-footed recently about how they respond and whether or not that edging to the right, which I felt that Reform was doing through the campaign, Nigel Farage talking about a country biased against white people and seizing on the various tragedies that we've seen recently, whether or not that is a technique that's going to play particularly well for them in the coming weeks and months.
Well, I think there's a big debate inside Reform about this. I mean, you can cut it both ways, can't you? I was just having a quick look at the figures while you were chatting there. I mean, if you put Reform and Restore together, you get to about 19,000 and Labour at just nudging up towards 25,000. So it's a gap, but, Restore, I take your point. I don't think it was I think it was sort of slightly, it was overestimated, the impact of Restore. But if it's not going away, Sam, you've got other seats where you just tweak those figures a little bit, don't you? And you would see that Restore would be able to, to rob Reform in places that they feel that they need to be winning. So I think this has been a bit of an awakening for them. I don't think the campaign felt that it ever really took off. And you could kind of tell because Nigel Farage, although he wanted to be involved with it, he was not like, I'm spending every waking moment that I can up in Makerfield. There's a book launch the other night. Admittedly, a book about Nigel Farage, but he's seeing his own brand, and then it's almost like these by-elections are sort of going their own way with the local candidates. In this case, it didn't really feel that it really came to life, did it?
Well, our brand is doing things in 20 minutes. The voters have spoken in a big way, so we spoke quite a lot this morning, so please forgive us. But we'll be back on Monday for Politics at Sam and Anne's from our homes, the normal locations. So we will see you then. Thank you very much.
See you on Monday.